Welcome to the United Lodge of Theosophists in the Washington, D.C. Bethesda area. Today is a special day. It's called ULT Day, where we honor the life and work of Mr. Robert Crosbie, who founded the United Lodge of Theosophists. So today we will hear a short biographical talk about his life and some readings from Madame Blavatsky, William Q. Judge, and Mr. Crosbie himself. What is the United Lodge of Theosophists, and what are its aims and its goals? These are all contained in the Declaration of the United Lodge of Theosophists, and it reads as follows. The policy of this lodge is independent devotion to the cause of theosophy, without professing attachment to any theosophical organization. It is loyal to the great founders of the theosophical movement, but does not concern itself with dissensions or differences of individual opinion. The work it has on hand and the end it keeps in view are too absorbing and too lofty to leave it the time or inclination to take part in side issues. That work and that end is the dissemination of the fundamental principles of the philosophy of theosophy, and the exemplification and practice of those principles through a truer realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. It holds that the unassailable basis for this union among theosophists, wherever and however situated, is the similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching, and therefore the ULT has neither constitution, bylaws, nor officers, the sole bond between its associates being that basis. And it aims to disseminate this idea among theosophists in the furtherance of unity. It regards as theosophists all who are engaged in the true service of humanity, without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization, and it welcomes to its association all those who are in accord with its declared purposes and who desire to fit themselves to be the better able to help and teach others. So now we will hear the first reading of this meeting by Madame Blavatsky.
This is from the writings of H.P. Blavatsky. The recognition of pure theosophy, the philosophy of the rational explanation of things, and the tenets, is of the most vital importance, inasmuch as it alone can furnish the beacon light needed to guide humanity on its true path. This should never be forgotten, nor should the following fact be overlooked. On the day when theosophy will have accomplished its most holy and most important mission, namely, to unite firmly a body of men of all nations in brotherly love, and bent on a pure altruistic work, not on a labor with selfish motives, on that day only will theosophy become higher than any nominal brotherhood of man. This will be a wonder and a miracle truly, for the realization of which humanity is vainly waiting for the last 18 centuries, and which every association has hitherto failed to accomplish. Altruism is the keynote of theosophy, and the cure of all ills. This it is which the real founders of the Theosophical Society promote as its first object, universal brotherhood. It is not violence that can ever ensure bread and comfort for all, nor is the kingdom of peace and love, of mutual help and charity, and food for all, to be conquered by a cold, reasoning, diplomatic policy. It is only by the close brotherly union of men's inner selves, of soul solidarity, of the growth and development of that feeling which makes one suffer when one thinks of the suffering of others, that the reign of justice and equality for all can ever be inaugurated.
This reading is from the writings of Robert Crosbie. Shall we find the true foundation for a changed civilization that all men and women can see and stand on? It is not philosophies, nor religions, nor political panaceas that are needed, but knowledge and a wider scope of vision than the vicissitudes of one short physical life. The knowledge that is greater than all the forms of religion ever invented is the knowledge of the very nature of man himself, for himself and in himself. For we are not here as things apart. We are here because of one great sustaining cause, infinite and omnipresent, nor separate from us, nor from any other being. It is the same in all beings above the human and in all beings below the human. The very root of our natures, the very man himself. It is the source of all powers and of all actions, whether good or evil. Then everything that is done by beings affects all beings. And all that it is has been caused by beings, each one affected according to his share in the cause. What the past has been, we are experiencing now. Our lives now being but repetitions of lives that preceded them. What the future will be, we are making now. We are going to have a league of humanity only when the ancient truths in the wisdom religion are once more perceived. When there is one purpose and one teaching, its truths are self-evident, not to be accepted because written in some book, nor because they are the dicta of some particular church. They are the only truths worth considering, because in the use of them they prove themselves true. And truth, we are, as we ought to know, always explains. When we have the explanation, we have the truth. Each one has to make his own verification of the truth. But the fact remains that there is truth, and it has always existed. It has come to us from beings higher than we, because once they turned their faces in the right direction and pursued the course pointed out to them.
The next reading is from the writings of William Q. Judge. We are really working for the future, laying the foundation for a greater day than this. We are all coming back together to carry on this work if we now take up all our opportunities. We must act from duty now and thus be right for the future. Our duty is to recognize the great human soul with which we have to deal and for which we should work. Its progress, its experience, its inner life are vastly more important than all our boasted civilization. That civilization could easily be swept away, and what would be left? What then could remain save the human experience, the experience of the soul? But no cataclysm can destroy your thoughts. They live on, and so all work that you do for the inner life of man can meet with no destruction, even though records and books and all the ingenious works upon this outer plane were swept out of existence. The race is as a whole in a transition state, and many of its units are kept back by the condition of the whole. We find the path difficult because, being of the race, the general race tendencies very strongly affect us. This we cannot do away with in a moment. It is useless to groan over it. It is also selfish, since we in the distant past had a hand in making it what it is now. The only way we can alter it is by such action now as makes each one a center for good. We are working for the new cycles and centuries. We are not working for some definite organization of the new years to come, but for a change in the manas and buddhi of the race. That is why it may seem indefinite, but it is nevertheless very defined and very great in scope. We are working with and for the great unseen, but actual brotherhood of humanity, and our efforts, if sincere, will have the aid of those, our brothers who have perfected themselves before us and are ever ready to help on the human family. So if we are finally fixed in that belief, we can never weaken. We appeal, therefore, to all who wish to raise themselves and their fellow creatures, man and beast, out of the thoughtless jog-trot of selfish everyday life. It is not thought that utopia can be established in a day, but through the spreading of the idea of universal brotherhood, the truth in all things may be discovered. What is wanted is true knowledge of the spiritual condition of man, his aim and destiny. Such a study leads us to accept the utterance of Prajapati to his son, quote, "Be restrained, be liberal, be merciful. It is the death of selfishness," unquote. And now we will hear a biographical talk on the life and work of Mr. Robert Crosbie.
So many papers. Good morning, friends. Today, as I stated, we are celebrating the life and work of Mr. Robert Crosbie. He was born in 1849 to Scottish parents in Montreal, Canada. His parents had met there and married. They belonged to a Presbyterian church, and R.C. and the family all attended. When he was 16 years old in 1869, he was asked to join the communion by his teacher. He refused, saying that he did not feel ready for it. And to all of his questions, what is life? What is sickness? What is suffering? What is joy? What is death? What's the purpose of life? The church could not answer any of these questions when asked, and he decided to look into things on his own to find out the truth. And from childhood he was interested in philosophical and occult studies, also religious books, and he decided to go out into the world and join the affairs of men. At 20, he formed a partnership with another man, and they opened their shop, and this was in leather manufacturing. Shortly thereafter, at 20, he married his partner's daughter. And in 1886-87, they had a chance to sell the business, which they did, and they moved to Boston because the partner's wife had passed away, and he was attending all kinds of seances to figure out the cause of it. And R.C. was invited to attend. He did, and he said that he could not find any legitimacy of the procedures that was going on. because his mother was a Highlander and she had the second eye. In other words, internally she was awake, and he had received that same gift from her. So he decided to look into telepathy, hypnotism, mesmerism, and clairvoyance. And partially, he says, he was successful. And the only reason he said he did not end up in black magic, because he wasn't aware of that statement at that time, was that he felt he received guidance. And he also says that these early studies helped him tremendously later on when he looked into the validity of things. So, they're in Boston, and his partner one day comes and says that there is going to be a branch of TS opening up in their locality, and that Theosophia was the title of the talk that was going to be given. And Mr. Crosbie decided to attend that first meeting, and when he heard the talk, he found out that that is what he was looking for, and he immediately joined it. And shortly thereafter, Mr. Judge came to give a talk, and RC and other members, new members, were introduced to him. And afterwards, when the meeting was over and everybody left, trying to get back to their hotels, as Mr. Judge walked away from him, he shouted back and he said, "Good night, Crosbie. I've got you on my list." And he says from that moment on, a veil had lifted, and he could see clearly. And a tie, he says, was formed, and this is a quote, which has never since been broken. The first book he read was Epitome of Theosophy, which Mr. Judge had written, and he said from then on the life current had changed, and he devoted all of his life to promulgation of Theosophy. In 1888, the esoteric section was formed, and he became its secretary, and later on, when Griggs resigned, he became the president. And Mr. Judge introduced him to HPB, and through a charter, HPB gave him permission to be in charge of the 7 New England groups that had formulated at that time. So he started that process that continued. In 1892, he was elected president of the esoteric section, and also he was the president of the TS branch of Boston. In that same year, he organized the 5th convention of American section of the TS, which was held in Boston, and in 1895, he proceeded to do the same for the 8th convention. From this point on, there are disturbances in the TS and its management, and we see come about division and turmoil, and Mr. Crosbie was also involved in all of that. Mr. Judge was attacked in 1894 to 96. He was exonerated, but later on he was persecuted by the one of the founders of the TS, Olcott, and of course Mrs. Besant was in there as well. And in this whole turmoil, Mr. Crosbie never turned away his face from the true teachings of Theosophy and those 2 beings that had been Master's messengers. He absolutely believed, because he could perceive internally the legitimacy of their claim that they were the messengers of the Masters, and that he knew internally that the message delivered was the truth. So he stood by Mr. Judge during that period of turmoil. And I directly quote this from the writings. When Mr. Judge passed away in 1896, the turmoil became really perceivable to all those who were involved in it. Hargrove and Neresheimer, who was the executor of Mr. Judge, got a hold of his keys, went to his offices, and went through his papers. And they came up with this statement that they found an incomplete diary in his papers that suggested that Mrs. Tingley should be the successor to Mr. Judge. And Mr. Crosbie, of course, is not in New York. He's in Boston, and he had courteous and cordial relationships with everybody in New York, because intermittently he visited Mr. Judge and stayed with him, as Mr. Judge would visit Boston and stay with Mr. Crosbie. So they had this beautiful relationship of trust and cooperative help. And so Mr. Crosbie says he didn't doubt the validity of the statement made by these two beings, because he felt that they had good judgment because they had been engrossed in the teachings themselves. Great. I'm sorry, I'm causing turmoil. I'll just put it up here. Thank you. So here we see that dissension is already taking place. Mr. Judge had stayed on the scene 5 years after HPB had left, and it seems like all of the suppressed feelings of the theosophical students fell on his head. So we have these two beings to be thankful for settling Mrs. Tingley onto the TS of the Times, because Mr. Crosbie had been in the movement for 14 years. He was already president of the Boston section, as well as by the charter issued by HPB, he was in charge of the 7 New England states with the esoteric section. So he offers his help to go to Point Loma and assist Tingley. Tingley then changes the name of the society into Universal Brotherhood and assigns herself as the sole dictator of the organization. Even though this happened, he still went and assisted Tingley for 2 years, and he said at the end of the first year he could perceive the inconsistencies that were happening around him, but he said he always gave people the benefit of the doubt, so he stayed another year, and at the end of that period he told Mrs. Tingley that he had absolutely no interest of staying and assisting her, because he could see what was going on all around him. And that is what the statement is in here, but it does not go into the details of it. There is another passage that we can go to if we want to read about it. And told her that he was separating himself from that organization. Mr. and Mrs. Crosbie, by this time, since 1900, he's of course married to his second wife, and they leave Point Loma, and they're penniless because he had contributed all of his wealth that he had gotten from selling his house and his business to the Point Loma Association. So they're penniless, and they go to South Pasadena. He rents a house there and finds himself a job as a bookkeeper in the Los Angeles Times, working very hard and long hours, and he rides the red cars, which were the street cars of the day. Mr. Crosbie and his neighbors, 7 of them to be precise, get together and form a study class, because all of his neighbors were also interested in these topics. So Mr. Crosbie preserves unbroken the link of the first section as well as the second section, both exoteric and esoteric. And in 1909, he restores the third section by the formation of the United Lodge of Theosophists. He organizes meetings under the charter he obtained from the TS that Hargrove had initiated in New York after he himself separated from Tingley in 1898, because he also saw that he was mistaken by his original statement that Mrs. Tingley was supposed to come after Mr. Judge. So this action of his then brings about a change in the New York membership, because all of Mr. Judge's associates in his lifetime come back to the New York Lodge. So Mr. Crosbie in 1908 issues an announcement, the title of which was "To All Open-Minded Theosophists." I have a copy of it, but it is extremely long to read it. But in it, he gives the reasons why the theosophical students, wherever and however situated, should consider becoming members, because as the first student mentioned, the ULT does not have any bylaws, officers. It's not an organization. It is simply a place where students of theosophy with the same ideology or similar ideology can meet and assist one another in keeping this line unbroken that he established in 1909. It is important because he was absolutely faithful to the founders of the Theosophical Society, because he understood their loyalty. This is HPB, Mr. Judge, and there was another, Damador, in India, who were absolutely faithful to the masters, and they kept that line open and unbroken, because when we internally realize the meaning of that statement, where HPB had said, "Be theosophists and work for theosophy," she says, "This is the never dormant wish of my heart." And HPB uttered those words, and Mr. Crosbie engrossed them in his own heart. He understood what it meant, that the saving of the Western world and unification of the East and the West was at stake here. This same ordeal that was suffered and worked with during that century, which was the 19th century, end of 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, still exists today. There are personages who are still announcing that they are the successors of HPB. They have become bodhisattvas. Any bodhisattva would not make such a proclamation. This is an internal growth process. They come as saviors of humanity. They never make these kinds of announcements. We have to look at their work to figure out what it is that they have done, what it is that they promulgated, so that we also can follow in their footsteps. And R.C. had made that so very prominent in his life. Everything to him was living theosophy. Every aspect of his life exhibited theosophy. Let's see. There were a couple other quotes I would like to do. In 1907 then, he makes this appeal. He establishes the ULT in 1909 after sending that announcement to all open-minded theosophists in 1908, and writes an article called ULT, Its Mission and Its Future, and invites all those who are in line with the original message of the masters to work for it, and tells us ULT has the semi-esoteric character, and that all of the theosophical societies up to that point had failed in establishing the guidelines for work and removing the personality out of the picture, becoming humble and working in humility for whole society, which is all of humanity. We are one. So he had to work to restore the integrity of the original impulse laid by masters through HPB. He stressed impersonality and anonymity to protect the work and help protect the workers from pride and ambition, which is normally what brings the workers down. As regards himself and his family, Crosbie was always well dressed in public and stressed that all those involved in it do so also. In 1910, letters in the beginning, which eventually were compiled as a Friendly Philosopher, was started, and he gave of his effort in a sacrificial way. He never ever refused any help to anybody, and he felt that by inviting everyone to work, in time the sorting out will take place. And he started Theosophy magazine, and he was its chief editor until 1919, when his body gave out on him. In 1912, the second quarter of the movement, the Theosophy magazine was founded, and Crosbie continued with that. The suggestion in all of these works is that we can get to know Mr. Crosbie through his writings and through his work. The Friendly Philosopher, he also wrote chapter 8 to 18 of the Notes on the Gita, his letters to everyone, and his sacrificial work in keeping this line unbroken. It is self-evident to those who read his writings. In 1718, he had tremendous burdens which were enormous. In addition to his work, he was a frequent speaker at the meetings of the ULT and constantly at the service of hundreds of students who sought his counsel all over the world. And a stream of correspondence from unknown inquirers who came to him for kind advice and suggestion, and he never denied this help, but gave it freely without a stint or limit, and that's a direct quotation. Worn out in these unselfish labors for the benefit advantage of his fellow men, burdened with the toll of advancing years, the frail body could no more sustain the increasing demands upon it. He died as he had lived, calm and serene, with no word of complaint during the days of intense suffering that preceded his release. His principles and impersonality is very apparent in all of the articles that he has penned, and one of them especially is Theosophy, a Progressive System of Religion, ought to be read by every student of Theosophy. He lived a very simple life, as stated. He was faithful to the founders of the movement to the end. He kept it unbroken, And he said, we will not wait for long, right before his death. And indeed, another worker appeared in the United States to carry on with the work that he had established. We owe him a tremendous debt for all of the books that were reprinted in their original form because they were all out of print. A lot of interpolations and alterations had gone into the secret doctrine. In fact, I believe anywhere from 30,000 to 40,000 changes were made to that book. In finishing this short biography, the student would like to make the statement that those books are of tremendous value to humanity today. Everything that was to be given by the masters to the world is contained in the writings of HPB and Mr. Judge, which Mr. Crosbie made every effort to retain in its purity for the coming generations. Those books include exoteric and esoteric knowledge, and R.C. says by this effort, by learning it, making it our own, promulgating it, giving it to others who are interested in it, it finally leads us to the ashram of the masters. This is its other purpose. Not only that we obtain knowledge, but that we find the masters, because the key link is the masters in this whole chain of progressive awakenings of the soul. Thank you. Sorry.
This is from the writings of Robert Crosbie. To make ourselves better able to help and teach others is the task. HPB says, the progress of the ego is a series of progressive awakenings, not being sticks nor stones, but human beings. We must feel success or failure. The window is shown in not being swallowed up by the one or cast down by the other. We should make a steady, unvarying pursuit of that which is seen to be right. Truth is not a man, nor a book, nor a statement. The nature of truth is universal. Its possessors in any degree will be found to be suppliers of universality in thought, speech, and action. Their effort will be for humanity, regardless of sex, creed, caste, or color. ULT points to the message, the messengers, and their enunciation of the work, and carry on the latter in accordance. We have no revelation to offer. We only hand on that which was known before. The position is unique and unassailable in that it makes no claim to any other authority from the message and the messengers, other than those two, message and messengers. The authority which we recognize is an internal recognition of the value of that which flows through any given point, focus, or individual. This is the authority of one's self-discrimination, intuition, the highest intellection. And now for the closing comments.
Thank you, friends. A few announcements is that there is an International Theosophical Conference in New York from August 8th through 11th. It'll be held at the Bohemian National Hall, and it's possible to find this information on the web at TheosConf, and that's abbreviated, TheosConf.org. And now we close the meeting and we'll renew ties of friendship. We'll meet again next week at 11, and after we socialize a bit, we will proceed with our study class in the Ocean of Theosophy. Thank you so much.